Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies and all. I am delighted to be before you today. Before presenting my reports to you, I would like to recall that when I first took the floor before you in 2022, my first words were for Ukraine. I stressed that the justification of any war must step away from rhetoric that denies the identity and the history of a nation. And I refer to the well-recognized and legally binding right to self-determination. 2 years have passed, and what I said then is still true today. And it is also true for Gaza. Since October last year, jointly with other special procedures, we have called for a permanent ceasefire, demanded support for UNRWA, and expressed concern at the apocalyptic humanitarian conditions, destruction, mass killing, wounding, and irreparable trauma endured by civilians. I am appalled by the annihilation of the cultural sector in Gaza and the destruction of cultural heritage sites. States in this assembly must do all they can to stop this violence. Armed attacks and military responses have already proven incapable of living to security and respect for human rights for all. Restoring international legality, accountability, and respect for humanity and dignity of all must prevail, including an end to Israel's 56 years of military occupation. This also applies to other places such as Libya, Myanmar, or Sudan. Dear all, last year I visited Germany. At the outset, I would like to thank Germany for its invitation and for the many rich and open discussions I conducted while in the country about the laws, policies, and efforts to implement the right of all to participate in cultural life. In other words, the right to freely express one's worldviews, values, and ways of life. Germany must be congratulated on many grounds: for the variety and diversity of its cultural sector, for the richness of the debates it fosters on the integration of the diversity of people living in the country, and on the difficult chapters of its past. Indeed, Germany has really taken a self-reflective look at its colonial past and is in the process of taking specific steps to address past injustices, including restitution. This is to be commended. I also would like to congratulate Germany for the way it addresses the challenges linked with the far-right movement. In my report, I highlight many of the numerous commendable initiatives respecting and implementing cultural rights, especially those of migrants, refugees, and LGBT+ persons, on which I had a specific focus. I am, however, concerned that most of these are either voluntary initiatives from institutions or civil society groups, or operate on a project basis, and do not benefit from the financial, structural, and institutional context for their continuity. In my report, I make a number of recommendations to help anchor these positive practices in time and normalize the standards across the country. I also noticed that important gaps exist in the full knowledge and partaking from all levels of government about cultural rights standards and norms, and about the role each institution and department should play in integrating and implementing these in their work. My report provides ideas about how to improve the situation, including by explicitly citing cultural rights in legislative instruments, developing guidelines, and steps that different bodies, in public bodies, must take to ensure compliance with human rights standards on cultural rights, and training for all levels among public bodies nationwide. These types of solutions could be implemented while maintaining Germany's governance system that encourages bottom-up and participatory leadership, and could help minimize the disparities in the respect and protection of cultural rights across Länder. In my visit, I have been informed about numerous legislative processes that were ongoing and offered opportunities to improve the protection and implementation of cultural rights. These include the ratification of the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, a Participation Act, a Self-Determination Act, a revision of the law on citizenship to facilitate the naturalization of long-term migrants, and a review of the General Equal Treatment Act. I hope to hear more from the government about these developments, and I really hope to continue the dialogue on the implementation of the recommendations of my report in the future. Excellencies and all, I am delighted to present to you my report on the right of everyone to participate in science. Its starting point is that science may only have transformative positive effects on addressing complex and interconnected challenges if conducted within a human rights framework. Too little attention has been given to the human rights dimensions of science. Without much debate on people's participation, science is too often presented in an uncritical and undisputed way. Policy decisions on science are neglecting the right to participate in science, which is restricted in practice to a few. As science and technology are portrayed as the solutions to our planetary crisis, the right to science is being undermined at the same time in several ways. These include efforts to gag at academic and scientific researchers, whether professionals or not, whose ideas do not fit the preferred political narratives. The underfunding of universities and reduced public research funding, often through austerity measures, also restrict the right to participate in science. This feeds the acceleration of the privatization and commodification of science, at odds with considering science as a common good. Disparities on funding between the global north and the global south continue to be enormous. Lastly, of concern to me is the instrumentalization of science through misinformation and disinformation to manipulate public opinion and delay policy decisions that may run against private interests. Excellencies and all, there is a need to use law, including human rights law, in implementing science and to reinforce the legal, regulatory and policy framework to allow for democratic control over the scientific enterprise. Democratic control, though, does not equate and should not equate with state control. States must allow a variety of voices rather than ensuring their monopoly in decision-making regarding scientific matters. In my report, I recall that the right to participate in science must be recognized to everyone, not just to scientists. As mentioned in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's Article 27, protecting the right of everyone to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. This does not mean that everyone should be recognized as a high-level scientific researcher and their views received with the same attention. But it does mean that first, the meaning of science must be inclusive and not exclusive. Therefore, due consideration should be given to scientific diversity, acknowledging that scientific knowledge is produced by communities that are historically and culturally situated. That means understanding sciences in the plural form, from various traditions and various cultural backgrounds, in various languages, and following diverse ways of researching and carried by a variety of scientific and epistemic communities, from the very local ones to cross-cultural ones. Second, states must ensure that everyone has different opportunities to participate and depart from the rigid distinction between the scientist who produces science and the general population, entitled only to receive, to enjoy the benefits derived from research conducted by the scientist. The circle of experts who have enhanced participation is not as inclusive as it has been perceived, and experts are not the only ones with the right to participate in science. People might do research in their own fields and in relation to their own concerns and aspirations, using knowledge and refining it for their own personal development. And there are many ways in which people can participate in science without undermining the expertise of scientific professionals, complementing it really in many ways, and demanding that science respond to their needs and those of the wider society. It is hence not only professionals who have the right to science, to participate in science. Open science is very important in this regard. Adequately funded public education in this respect is an essential precondition for the right to participate in science. It is now more and more widely accepted that states should endeavour to align their policies with the best scientific evidence available. They should do so while using a whole array of sciences, including, for example, sociology, psychology, history, which must interact with natural sciences to provide evidence and inform political decisions, including by opening up and untangling issues of ethical considerations in more depth and deconstructing techno-solutionism that we see today. The recent past has shown that difficult ways forward need to be based on science in all its diversity, but must also inform people of their bases and be open to the questioning and critical inquiry. And states must not use scientists to hide behind important political decisions that are to be made by states. We have seen how tensions from lack of participation in important decisions, portrayed as directly deriving from scientific evidence, have created distrust and resentment of the population towards scientific experts. Their expertise is doubted, and some have been threatened, detained, undermined, and even ridiculed. Meanwhile, unscientific suggestions and populist, oversimplified explanations and uncritical suggestions become dominant in the public sphere, often through social media. At the same time, states must ensure that disinformation is limited. The right to participation in science per se should not hinder the right to the best aspirations of science and the best applications of science. The unlimited participation of non-experts can lead to erroneous conclusions and claims sometimes. Finally, participation in benefits and in preventing harms is essential. In particular, this is something that we have to ensure when it comes to vulnerable and marginalized groups, including indigenous peoples who have the right to free, prior and informed consent, peasants, and those located in remote areas is essential. I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to our fruitful dialogue.